Hey everybody, welcome to a special wrestling Q&A. Now, over on my Patreon, in case you don't know, for the past year I have been doing videos all about wrestling. Basically the same sort of videos that I was doing on the main channel on YouTube for a little while until I had to stop because of copyright strikes. But I've been doing them over there for the past year and they've been pretty awesome and very well received. So as ever, I will start this by saying if you are interested in seeing those, please do have a look at my Patreon. There's a lot of awesome stuff there. Stuff about Takeshi Morishima, stuff about classic wrestling jobbers, matches gone wrong, some kind of mix of really in-depth documentary stuff, good list articles, sort of, you know, the depressing, the emotional, but also, you know, the happy and fun. There's a lot of cool stuff there. Anyway, I asked my patrons to give me all sorts of questions on mainly Japanese wrestling, mainly Puroresu, but also wrestling in general, and so that I could answer them. So that is basically what I'm going to do in this video. I've got a whole load of questions to get through, so if you ever wanted to know my general casual thoughts on wrestling, well, here it is. Here's all the opinions that I have for you. Right, let's get on. So Rob Ferguson asks, several of your videos have mentioned Antonio Inoki, and Giant Bubba's rivalry over the years. Do you think it's worth its own video someday? I mean, absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt. I think there's several videos that I have that are kind of like ultimate goal videos when it comes to the wrestling stuff. And a lot of them are pretty much all about rivalries. Like Misawa and Kawada would obviously be a big one, because I mean, I think for many of us that's how we got into Puroresu in the first place, those two wrestling each other. And Inoki and Baba is obviously probably the biggest one of them all, because Inoki's always been such a presence in almost all the wrestling videos I do. There's always seems to be Inoki shoehorned in somewhere, even if he's not the main attraction, and Bubba's obviously always been a big one too. And the two absolutely hated each other, and they were both the heads of the biggest promotions at that time, All Japan and New Japan, so why wouldn't I want to do a video about it? It would be incredible. It would be a hell of a lot of work, which is why I consider it like an ultimate goal. It's something that would take quite a long time to really compile and really do justice to, if you'll pardon the pun. But yes, absolutely, there is without an absolute shadow of a doubt, I would very much want to do like a really big, full, in-depth Inoki Baba rivalry video, because there would be a lot to talk about. Mr. Wolfwood asks, within the last 10 years, whom do you feel had the most potential to make it to the top of New Japan, but has utterly wasted it? Also, favourite non-WWE Rumble or Battle Royal? I suppose it's an obvious one, and while he perhaps never really had a chance of making it to the top, I always think that, you know, Yoshi-Hashi, people forget, like, he was on Excursion and that at the same time as Okada. Probably was more successful on Excursion than Okada was, although pretty much all of that was TNA's fault because they were dog shit. Came back at the same time, they wrestled each other at Wrestle Kingdom in a rather terrible match where, you know, the one where Okada had like really bad die job, and the Rainmaker looked like a really awful finisher, kind of like a sort of false, like, look at this guy, and then he goes on to become Kazuchika freaking Okada. So it's amazing to think that he's like a contemporary of Okada, and so many other people from his time have gone on to such great things, people from after him have gone on to such great things, and he's just always been, just there, just dead in like the middle. He's like the sort of guy, you know, when you have a look at like the G1 Climax, you're less like, oh, Yoshi-Hashi's there. You know, you kind of immediately think of all the guys you'd rather have there instead of Yoshi-Hashi. He's not that great. He's okay. He's just never really involved in anything interesting at all. So I think he's the obvious answer, and I can't really see beyond him, certainly not within the last 10 years, considering that clearly at some stage New Japan fought an awful lot of him. You generally have to be fought a lot of to even, you know, be going on like the foreign excursion. You do that if, you know, New Japan think, oh, you've got something. And so obviously they thought that, but turned out he didn't, really. So that's that. As far as non-WWE Rumble Battle Royals go, it's kind of a tough one, because the Rumble, the Battle Royal, is so ingrained into WWE. Like, when I think of others, I think, oh, hang on, those were bad. Like, obviously, you know, you've got the WCW World War III ones, which were just not great. just too confusing. You've got ridiculous TNA stuff like, what is it, the Inside Out Battle Royal, where you have to get into the ring. It's just fucking ludicrous. So it's hard to really think. So I guess it'd have to be the New Japan Wrestle Kingdom Battle Royals, because they're just a nice bit of fun to start off a massive card, aren't they? I really like the one where Masahito Kakihara won in the end, because that was just kind of a bit of a nice feel-good moment to have someone who kind of had his career cut short get into the ring again and have a little win. That was quite nice. But yeah, those are always a good way to start off the card. So as far as non-WWE Battle Royal goes, I guess I'd choose that one. Joey M. Best asks, where can you watch old All Japan Women's and Noah shows? Also, what are your thoughts on the current state of Noah, particularly with the Muta title win? Well, as far as like the old shows goes, I mean, generally there is a lot of stuff available on YouTube still. I mean, there are other places, and links can be found in and around the place, so to speak. I probably can't just throw a Salem in the video. As far as Muta goes and the current state of Noah, well, generally, as a rule, I don't like people past like the age of 50 winning the big title. I just think, you know, you've got lots of young stars. Why do you really need that? You know, having to you know, back someone who's been around for so long. Also, if I'm quite honest, I've never been a huge fan of Muta. To be honest, I wouldn't say like, oh, I think like Great Muta's bad, because obviously he's not. He's just never really been one of my favourites. So yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say that I'm big on Keiji Muto winning the title in 2021, but it is obviously a boost in popularity. It's something that's going to get people noticing, and for Noah, that's obviously a good thing, because Noah generally do put on quite a decent product these days, and the more eyes that get onto that product, the better. It's not like Keiji Muto winning the title is a sign of, you know, Finn's being terrible all across the card, because Finn's are good across the card, and they'll probably do good stuff with the Muta win too. They'll use it to hopefully boost someone else up, whether it's Keno, Hawada, Kiyomiya, anyone like that. That's what it'll eventually be used for. I can't imagine it'll go to like Muta to, I don't know, Junaki Yama or someone like that. So generally Noah's a good company, so the more eyes on it the better. There's good and bad to this, depending on your point of view. Shodate asks, do you think that pre-stardom but post-All Japan Women Joshi is underrated as a rule? I mean, definitely. It's underrated because this was the kind of dark era of Joshi, I suppose, when there was good stuff happening from various promotions out there, but just not many people were watching. So there's lots of names from that time that did do some really good work, but outside of like the big hardcore Joshi fans, not many people know them because they just weren't watching. You know, you have like Yoshiko Tamura, for example, who's a very good wrestler. She was the one who WWE were kind of vaguely interested in signing for a bit. There's a women like, oh, you know, they were going to sign this Joshi star. They were going to sign Tamura. And everyone kind of thought, really? Because obviously this was the time when women's wrestling in WWE was terrible. Like, I think this was even like post like Trish Stratus and Lita retiring. So like there was very little to go on. So it's like, what are we going to do? Get this Joshi wrestler and have her compete in a bra and panties match or whatever, some shit like that. Obviously, you've got the likes of Asumi Hyuga, Ayumi Kirihara, all really excellent wrestlers. Like, the people who would watch Joshi would sing these people's praise and say, you know, you really need to watch these people because they're some of the best things going. But it was just a very dark time. So yeah, there's a lot of very underrated stuff there. Plus, you also have guys who have been around for ages and were still doing good work then. You know, you've got like Satomura, obviously did lots of great work then. She's been around for donkey's years. You've got the early work of Kana, Asuka. There's all sorts of good stuff from there. I mean, the trouble is, a lot of it, I suppose, is getting even harder and harder to find. You know, you've really got to go looking around your old tape trading sites probably nowadays if you want to find that sort of thing. But yes, I would definitely say it's underrated. Jeremiah Allen says, who is your favourite of the Pillars, as in the Pillars of Heaven, from All Japan, and who is your favourite of the Musketeers from New Japan? So, for the Pillars, absolutely 100% now, then, and forever, one of my all-time favourite wrestlers, Dangerous K, Toshiaki Kawada. And as far as the Musketeers go, it would be a Shinya Hashimoto for pretty much the same reasons. I think, I suppose, with those two choices, you can probably guess that I have a kind of a type. I like, the stiff, intense, the striking, the really, anger, and in Kawada's case, the complete lack of teeth. So, yeah, those are kind of... When I first saw, Kawada especially, he was just immediately appealing just because of his intensity and all of the, the kicking and the strikes and the Ganso bomb and all of that stuff. And also, to me, probably the greatest seller ever. So, I mean, that kind of helped his match as well. It's just so dramatic because of how good he was selling. And as far as Hashimoto goes, even though not necessarily everything Hashimoto did in the ring was brilliant, the stuff when he was on top, I mean, it was really top. And his fire, his own, just sheer rage in the ring is probably unmatched, to be honest. So, yeah, definitely those two. I wouldn't even have to think about that. Giant Bubba was known to dislike deathmatch wrestling. He called it garbage wrestling. But two of the most well-known deathmatch promotions, FMW and Big Japan, were started by former All Japan wrestlers, Atsushi Onita and the Great Gojika. Do I think they started those promotions to stick it to Bubba? No, I definitely wouldn't have thought they would have started it to stick it to Bubba. As a Shodate did reply in the comments and says that no, Onita saw Bubba like a second father, and that would have been true. The All Japan atmosphere, especially when the Bubbas were in charge, was very much like a family. And so, yeah, there's just far too much respect there to think that they were sticking it to Bubba. Because unlike Inoki, who's fallen out with a lot of people over his life, didn't really seem like too many people actively fell out with Giant Bubba, on a personal level. They might well have fell out with Motoko, his wife, because Motoko was kind of the bad cop in the whole relationship. So, but it doesn't seem like they fell out with Giant Bubba. Although, that said, because All Japan were considered such a family unit, because the Bubbas never had kids on their own, he certainly didn't take people leaving All Japan too well. Like he said, when Tenryu left All Japan, he was like, Tenryu will never work for All Japan again. And indeed, he didn't, while Giant Bubba was alive. So, yeah, even if Bubba might have looked kind of down on Onita and Kojika for doing deathmatch wrestling, or even just for leaving All Japan in general, I don't think that would have certainly not been reciprocated on part of Onita and Kojika. Definitely not. Dragon Sex Master, what a good name. Thoughts on the Gaijin abroad? Finley, Osprey, Parker, Sabre, and Brooks. Well, as far as those New Japan folk go, and others, I mean, Zack Sabre Jr., he's... Zack Sabre's one of my favourites in the company. I mean, that's just obvious. I mean, I am going to be pretty well disposed to, a mouthy, bloody Cockney Essex lad who swears a lot and likes to tie people up in knots. I love Zack Sabre. And I really like Will Ospreay too. I mean, he's not exactly the brightest bulb out there, let's face it. He probably shouldn't use social media at all, but he is pretty undeniably one of the absolute best in the world. Just watching him in the ring is just something to behold. I think all of us probably, or certainly a lot of us, really caught attention to Ospreay when he had that match with Ricochet at Super Juniors, which was just like, oh my god, this is just unbelievable wrestling. As far as CJ Parker or Juice Robinson goes, Juice Robinson isn't necessarily my cup of tea, but he's certainly good. He's only really my cup of tea in that there's other sort of styles beyond his that I really prefer. I still think he's obviously a pretty good wrestler, and WWE were utterly stupid to get rid of him. But the one Gaijin you didn't mention for some reason, who I am an absolute total and mark for, possibly one of my absolute very favourite wrestlers in the whole company, I'm a huge Switchblade mark. I love Jay White. I just think Jay White, everything that he does in the ring, he just really just has it. He's just such a shit-eating bastard of a wrestler. So yeah, he's definitely my favourite out of all New Japan's Gaijins. Some people might think, yeah, Jay White, he's not quite as perhaps exciting, I guess, as Will Ospreay. He doesn't have quite, the technical, tying up in knots that Zack Sabre has, but he's got everything. He does everything to a really freaking good standard. I love Jay White. Who is the most underrated wrestler? This is Dragon Sex Master again, by the way. Who is the most underrated wrestler in the UK, and why is it Gene Money or Spike Trivet? Do you mean currently? Because, honestly, I don't know too much about current UK wrestling, I have to say. I'm more familiar with the old stuff, World of Sport. So, of those guys, people who discover World of Sport I say that like it's a brand new thing and people haven't been discovering World of Sport for 20 friggin' years now. They tend to look past the bigger dudes in favour of, your liver technical types, your Johnny Saint, Steve Gray, Jim Breaks, Clive Myers. Those guys are obviously awesome, but there is plenty of good to be found when watching, especially Wayne Bridges. I always really like watching Wayne Bridges out of the old stuff. And another guy I always liked who barely anyone ever mentions, Soulman Dave Bond. He was a really cool heel, really always used to get the crowd on his back. Very few people seem to mention him at all nowadays, and he was also kind of a trendsetter because he was one of the very few. I mean, obviously you had Clive Myers, but Dave Bond was very good as a heel, and I don't doubt that a lot of the reason the crowd was on his back was due to racism, but he certainly did a lot of good stuff and had a good hand in both the technical style and also in heelism and power. Quite a different mix from a lot of the other guys who are in World of Sport. Always cool to watch, but no one ever mentions Soulman Dave Bond. I think he passed away about 10 years ago, unfortunately. Good wrestler. Dragon Sex Master again asks, thoughts on Noah since it's back at Budokan, and do I think DDT can get any bigger? Well, I'm glad to see that Noah's still kicking around and getting stronger. Wrestling would be a much worse place, especially Puro if they were not in it. So I always keep a little eye on how it's going, and the awesome Misami account on Twitter helps with that. Misami's really cool in general, and she helped me out quite a lot when I did my video on Takeshi Murashima. DDT, as far as DDT goes, well, DDT isn't a promotion I follow all that hugely. It's obviously all cool and everything, and they have often quite funny antics, stuff that's become, a cornerstones of wrestling memery. And so, yeah, it's quite popular. I just don't really follow it. There's so many promotions out there, I cannot follow everything. I think DDT's really good from what I've seen. It's the sort of thing that has a ceiling, though. The man who beat Chris Patton twice strikes back, which is probably my favourite username of all the people who are on my Patreon. How did you come up with that? That is wonderful. Who, in your opinion, is the most underrated wrestler of the past 10 years? Well, this one maybe doesn't count thanks to recent events, but it would have always been Lance Archer. He would always be the man who's up there, because he has always been my top boy. I've always loved Lance Archer. Loved him when he was Vance Archer. Really liked him when he was Lance Hoyt in TNA. So he would always be my choice, because it's why don't they give Lance Archer what he deserves? But thanks to AEW, he's not really that underrated nowadays, because AEW really use him, same as New Japan really started using him well at the time that he was coming to the end of his run there. In fact, he is in serious danger of actually not qualifying to be a boy at all. He might win a fucking title someday, and then what the hell am I going to do? I'll have to think of another top boy. Still, I suppose I would say him, because he's always been brilliant. And it's only relatively recently that everyone is seeing it and just seeing how good he actually is. WWE in particular, what did they do with him? They did nothing. They had him, and they did nothing. TNA did way more with him. Obviously he was there for years, but when WWE got him, what did they do with him? Just went, let's push Snitsky instead. I don't know. I don't think Snitsky was even around then, but you get my drift. Aidan Degg asks, most egregiously misused Japanese worker in an American Fed. Seems to have been a fairly common thing, whether they were there short or long term. There's the WCW show in the mid-90s where commentary talk over a match with guest workers that winds up being qualitatively the best thing on the card. Yeah, I think that's a tag match involving All Japan Women guys. I think Akira Hokuto and folk like that were in it. Waffling on about the interminable Homergan angle of the time. God, yeah, it was awful, wasn't it? The big Joshi wrestler influx in the mid-90s is a big one, especially, around the time of Survivor Series 95 when you had Arja Khan come in, and it did seem like, they were going to position Arja Khan as Alundra Blaze as next challenger. Although that's kind of, I suppose, more of a mixed opportunity because who knows where it would have led to, because obviously Medusa left, famously dumped the women's title in the bin and all of that. So I don't know if that necessarily counts, because we don't know where that would have ended up. But I do find it very hard to look past Taka and Kaientai, because, they were awesome in Michinoku Pro. They were one of the most badass stables going. ECW even used them well in a couple of appearances. And then, Kaientai come to WWE, and they're complete comedy droppers with a shitty oriental joke. That bloody angle with Val Venus, I choppy your peepee and all that, just Everything awful, awful, awful. Hated every single moment. Like, because Taka was awesome. I love Taka, and it's like, you know, that was perhaps one of the first real signs of just really depressing anger with the product when I was a teenager. It's like, why aren't they doing anything with Taka Michinoku aside from this, you know, dog shit with Yamaguchi-san? He's just losing all the time. Like, Taka Michinoku's most famous moment in the Fed is that bloody bump he did in the Royal Rumble. I mean, Funaki, I suppose, Funaki was never that great. But, I mean, obviously they had Teo as well for a while. And, I mean, Dick frickin' Togo was there for a bit. Didn't use them. I mean, wrestling was never a big priority back in Attitude Era WWE. But the usage of those guys was just criminal, to be honest with you. I mean, I suppose there's other ones you can think of. But then it depends on skill. And that, it's like Ultimo Dragon was obviously in WWE for a minute. But I suppose that never really was going to go too far because Ultimo Dragon was quite old by that time. You had guys like Kenzo Suzuki come in and do nothing, but then obviously Kenzo Suzuki was friggin' awful, so that doesn't really count. And then you had guys like Tajiri, who actually pretty much did okay. So yeah, I would have to say Taka. I can't really think of too many others, to be honest. I mean, obviously there's Itami as well, there's Kenta, but I think a lot of that was just derailed due to injuries. So yeah, Taka. Favourite wrestler right now in AJPW, Noah and NJPW, asks Dan Jetstar. Well, again, generally due to the constraints of time, I probably don't follow current All Japan and Noah enough to really have a dead-on favourite there, but I do really like Keno. I think he's got quite a lot going for him. As for New Japan, well, until the day he retires, it's going to be Minoru Suzuki. And when that happens, as probably mentioned, Switchblade Jay White. I am a big Jay White mark. Pink Lava Lamp says, would you ever make videos about the Japanese indies, particularly the sleaze companies? Oh, there'd definitely be some really good stuff there for sure. Specifically, a video on the early days of Big Japan I think would be very interesting, especially that collaboration with CZW. I mean, that'd be worth a video all on its own, wouldn't it? Aside from other things, I really love the Stop the Matsunaga angle that 01 Max did, which is the most wonderful mixture of just traditional Puro folk with a classic sleaze deathmatch kin. I really want to do something about that eventually, even if it's not like a video on its own, just, you know, cool, underrated angle, because it's one of the best things 01 has ever done. I also would really want to do Survival Tabita at one point. He's one that's just got to be covered. I mean, Survival Tabita's like the kin of the jobbers when it comes to wrestling, and that's like a perfect bit of wrestling sleaze, really, isn't it? So yeah, definitely. Japanese indies would be a very good subject. Ian Lurch asks me, simple question, what's your 5 favourite wrestlers ever? Very tough question, obviously. So I guess probably the fairest thing to do here would be to do one for East, one for Puro, one for West, just based purely on how I feel right now. So, for the West, Eddie Guerrero, Bret Hart, Daniel Bryan, Bryan Danielson, Rey Mysterio, Vader. That's how I feel now. For the East, Toshiaki Kawada, Minoru Suzuki, Jushin Liger, Mitsuharu Misawa, Dump Matsumoto. There, those would be my picks. I'm not gonna. I can perhaps expand on them at a later date, but yeah, if I had to ask me right now, and you know, you put that gun to my head, that's what I would say right now. Frank S says, what is your personal opinion on Japanese death matches, like from defunct promotions like FMW and current BJW? I would say that I have quite a soft spot for Big Japan. Really much more than I ever had for FMW. I mean, I like some of the FMW stuff. There's some amusing fun there, but then there's other stuff from FMW that just doesn't really come off well at all. But Big Japan is, well, the best deathmatch stuff there's ever been since, you know, like the mid-2000s or so. I don't really think there's much doubt about that. I mean, it's so much better from the wrestling stuff. I mean, not necessarily just from a pushing extremities, dude, point of view, but just from the, you know, actual storytelling and skill that's involved. There's actual storytelling in these massive, brutal death matches. Takashi Sasaki, I think, is brilliant. Definitely my favourite there. Also, Abdullah Kobayashi. Gotta love Yuko Miyamoto as well. They're really good wrestlers. They just happen to do deathmatch wrestling. So, you know, I'm a fan. Mark Rodenhurst asks me, which young under-the-radar Puroresu talents do you predict will be the headliners of the next generation? I get very strong icon vibes from Yun Uemura. So as mentioned, I think Keno is definitely a person who has a very it vibe. He just looks like a big star whenever he's out there, and he just needs that opportunity to grasp a wider audience. I mean, I suppose you could say that a lot about the big stars in Noah and All Japan, because, yeah, they just need that opportunity, and in those promotions, things like that can be kind of hard to come by. As far as New Japan goes, I really like the look of Toa Henare whenever he wrestles. I think every time he gets out there, he gets better and better, just seems to get it more and more every time, and surely he's going to be a top gaijin in the years to come. Here's a very involved question. Unknown Figure asks me, again, simply, what is your personal favourite match? If you can't choose one, or simply wish to gush about great matches, what's your favourite match from each of your favourite promotions? Okay, so yeah, I could never choose just one. So again, I will throw a bunch of promotions out there and just try to be spontaneous about it. It's because I have written this stuff down, so, you know, I'm not going, you know, like, and all that. So for WWE, I've put down Brett vs. Owen, WrestleMania 10. Just the most amazing opener. There wasn't an opener even on the same level until Daniel Bryan vs. Triple H at WrestleMania 30. The shock of the finish, the intricacy of everything they did. I mean, there are matches at WrestleMania that were better and more emotional. Matches in WWE that were better and more emotional. You know, Eddie's victory against Brock at No Way Out. His match with JBL at Judgment Day. Those are very close. But Brett vs. Owen is the match that basically made me a wrestling fan for life. You know, I watched that and, you know, that's me forever. That's, you know, going beyond just, you know, yeah, Undertaker, yeah, Ultimate Warrior, you know, the kid wrestling stuff. For Noah, this is kind of a dark horse choice, kind of an outsider choice, I suppose. Kenta versus Suwa from, like, 2006 Junior Heavyweight match. Suwa, God, I miss Suwa so much. Again, there are definitely way better matches than this in Noah. I mean, most of that, you know, your big Kabashi main events, Kabashi Takayama, Kabashi Akiyama, Kabashi Misawa, Kabashi just about everybody. But this match is just my personal favourite because it's the most wonderful clash between Kenta's virtuosity and the all-time great heelishness of Suwa, who just savours every single moment of this big match. Suwa was so underrated, man. He retired from wrestling way too early. He was just one of the most entertaining and just flat-out fun heels to watch. Like, one of the really few people in Puroresu who you always seem to get such a genuine reaction of utter dislike from crowds, and just had so much fun with being a heel. I, you know, just wish he did so much more in wrestling than he actually ended up doing. Loved him. So yeah, I think just a personal, like, that is just a very personal favourite match of mine when it comes to Noah. New Japan, I would say Kenny Omega versus Chris Jericho at Wrestle Kingdom. This was just one of those matches where the mouth was completely agape, and I just watched it in shock, just having no idea just how the hell it was going to end, and then just the ending, just living up to everything, just the sheer, almost personal seeming hatred that came out in every last bit of it. I mean, frickin' Jericho, I mean, it's a wonder he wasn't on my top 5 Western favourites list, to be honest. All Japan, simple answer, Kawada and Taue versus Misawa and Kobashi 6-9-95. Generic answer, but it is the greatest tag match ever. I don't really need to justify that too much. If you've not seen that match, I mean, just search 6-9-95, it will come up. When Kobashi tries to cover up Misawa, oh, that's one of the most tears moments in wrestling, that is. Speaking of that sort of thing, for All Japan women, Chigusa Nagayo versus Dump Matsumoto, either one, the first or the second, they are the most emotionally driven matches I've ever seen. They're just unlike anything else. They're the sort of matches that, I mean, if I watch them in the right mood, I can actually be in floods of tears at points. And I mean, when the hell can you say that about any wrestling match, really? Just spellbinding. For Ring of Honor, Bryan Danielson versus, as he was then, versus almost anyone from his 2005 to 2006 reign. Some of the most spellbinding wrestling there's ever been in my mind. The matches against Roderick Strong, incredible. Christopher Daniels, Samoa Joe, Kenta, Jesus, Delirious. Even like the minor matches like Delirious were bloody great. Just he did total classics basically every time out during that reign. It's one of my favourite reigns of all time ever, and I might well just do a video on it someday because Ring of Honor at that time for me was just the best. I was a huge fan. But my favourite of all those matches would be the climactic third bout with Nigel McGuinness at Unified. Just an incredibly hot crowd in Liverpool. Like, really, just everyone just so behind Nigel McGuinness. And, I mean, they'd really pulled out the stops in their first two bouts before that, but the third was just a level beyond. I mean, some parts of that might even be kind of tricky to watch now. Like there is the part where Nigel gets kind of pulled into the ring post, which is really like, oh god, like, especially, you know, when we think about head injuries these days, it's like, I mean, when there were kind of fucked up things about Ring of Honor back then, like, they actually did used to advertise. It's like, oh, you know, wow, there's this match, this guy got a concussion, this guy got a concussion, and that was actually kind of an advertising point, which when you look back on it was a bit like, that's pretty bad. But the quality of the wrestling was just another level, especially from Danielson, who is one of my favourites ever. WCW, Eddie versus Ray, Halloween Havoc 97. Godly match. Eddie at his absolute best, Ray at his young, fiery best. And I can't have this go by without one appearance from Eddie, who is my favourite western wrestler. I absolutely loved Eddie Guerrero, and I was so sad when he died. That'll do for now for this. Thank you for the questions. Julata Pan says, what are your thoughts on shoot-style promotions such as UWFI and Battle Arts? Love them. It was so great being bedazzled by the old Bushido broadcasts of UWFI that used to be on Eurosport back in the 90s, because it was so different to any other wrestling out there at all, but it was just so great. It was very refreshing. And so much later, when I actually found out about shoot style, properly found out what Bushido actually was, totally my jam. And Battle Arts too, although that is certainly a weirder zone, a niche of a niche, something, you know, for the more experienced shoot style enthusiast to check out. Ed Carden asks, which promotions do you currently follow closely, which do you follow more casually, and which have you basically dropped at this point in 2021? I would say that AEW and New Japan are my close follows. I mean, I would love to follow others more in depth. I'd love to be able to follow every single wrestling promotion I can, but there's not enough time in the day. So much to do, so little time. I do keep up with Noah and Stardom casually, probably most of all the others, along with just trying to keep abreast with general happenings. And of course we do have WWE, which is perhaps kind of separate from all this because it's so omnipotent. I mean, as far as WWE and NXT goes, I still take the odd bit of interest in that, but the whole setup there just pisses me off a lot. Like, watching WWE and NXT for any length of time to me ends up being so frustrating when you think of how much people just don't get used and things just get wasted that I can only do it in phases. As far as stuff that I've basically dropped at this point, well, these days I don't know too much about what happens in Ring of Honor, even though I was once, as mentioned, a very big fan. I just don't really follow that at all anymore. I suppose I also wish that I knew a lot more about current Lucha Libre than I do, but again, there's just not enough time, and there's so many friggin' promotions in the world, like, I can't keep up with everything. I have too much other stuff on my plate. Stephen Petrivelli inquires, what are some good starting matches to watch if I want to start getting into shoot style? Great lead-in from a previous question. Well, I would say that it's hard to argue with classic UWFI. It's where plenty of folk got started, including myself, even if we didn't know we were watching UWFI. So there's a whole bunch of awesome matches, mainly involving Nobuhiko Takada. He was always the guy in the main events. You got Takada versus Kazuya Yamazaki, Takada versus Gary Albright, Takada versus Kiyoshi Tamura, and best of all, the series of Takada versus Vader matches. I mean, those are just the absolute kins, the best matches that UWFI ever put on. If you like that stuff, then you will happily go to Rins and have some Akira Maeda. Not to mention the awesome submissions of Volkan. I mean, Volkan is a guy who, the amount of matches he wrestled was relatively little, but almost all of them are killer, even though he wasn't actually trained in professional wrestling. And from there you go to Battle Arts and the awesome Yuki Ishikawa, Daisuke Aikida, Alexander Otsuka. So generally speaking, those are the names you want to watch out for. If you're just starting to watch shoot style, any wrestler that I've just mentioned is going to guarantee you a damn good time. I look forward to seeing what you think of shoot style. NBR Superstar asks me, if you had the chance to book a once-in-a-lifetime past versus present Tokyo Dome worthy match, who would you like to see face each other? I've said once before that I would love to see early 2000s Jun Akiyama versus pretty much every 2017 New Japan main eventer, like Okada or Omega. Well, answer in a similar vein, but only bigger I suppose, 90s Misawa versus Okada. It's a generic as hell choice really, perhaps the most generic choice you could possibly make, but just imagine it. Just imagine the atmosphere of seeing Misawa in his prime and Okada in his prime, which is now, going at it. It would be like nothing else in the entire history of Puroresu, so why wouldn't you choose that match? James Cascal asks me, can we get a part 2 Jobber video? Leon Ruff in NXT straight up went from Jobber to a champion and a serious underdog babyface in one angle. Maybe. As I said, I do want to do something on Survival Tabita, because he is kind of the ultimate jobber, not to mention one of the greatest comedy wrestlers of them all. I mean, the guy wrestled on a mat in a gym in Saitama against gigantic kaiju monsters. I mean, what's not to love? So I definitely want to do something about him, but that might be a video on its own, just because there's so much fun to look at there. So I don't know about getting some other jobbers involved with that, but we'll see. We'll see who comes up. Jay Green asks, hey Kim, how do you feel about the Forbidden Doors opening, making way for cross-promotional collaboration? Good. Cross-promotional collaboration is brilliant. Of course we want to see more of it. It opens up so many different matches, as long as it's used right. I mean, it happens a lot in Puroresu as it is. You do get, promotions collaborating with each other, especially more and more as, certainly in like the darker days, like you had like New Japan, All Japan and Noah all coming together for shows, and obviously it's always been a thing in like Joshi since even its heyday in the 90s. So, a lot of promotions do it. It's only really Forbidden Doors for WWE these days, let's be honest, and, well, they're much too precious to let even the remotest thing like that happen, so while it's never going to happen for them, I just can't see it anyway. It's great that it happens with all other companies, whether it's like AEW and Impact or some of the classic stuff that's happened over the years. It always tends to produce good results. I mean, unless the WWE doing it, one in a fake invasion angle, and they fuck it all up. So yeah, maybe they shouldn't do it after all. And lastly, Benjamin Emerson says to me, what's an underrated Puro and or Joshi match that you feel more people need to see? Well, there's this one match, it's a shoot style match, funnily enough, between Yuki Ishikawa and Daisuke Aikida. It's from like 2005, 2006 in some promotion that, to be honest, I don't even know the name of. And it's just these two old gits. They come together, they have a lot of respect for each other, they faced each other so many times, and just something about this particular occasion, they just bring the absolute hate out on each other. Just one of the most vicious, dramatic, stiffest matches. I always think of it as being, it's like, have you ever seen like the Ridley Scott movie, The Duelists? It's like that, it's like the freaking Duelists, only in wrestling form. And it's an all-time favourite match of mine. I will link it in the description because it's definitely available somewhere on YouTube. Hopefully it is, because you must see it. If you like Puroresu, if you like wrestling in general, it's a match you want to see. And those are all the questions I got. So, yeah, thank you for all the questions. I had a lot of fun asking them. Thank you to all my patrons. Again, I will say, if you want to see the wrestling stuff that I do on my Patreon, it is $2 a month to pledge to get to see it, and there's all sorts of stuff out there, because as I say, I've been doing it for a year now and it's gone down pretty well. So yeah, thank you for watching if you've been entertained by my thoughts on wrestling, and yeah, hopefully I will see you all again soon for the next video or stream or shit post on Twitter or wherever I'm going to be next. Anyway, bye for now.